Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Hi,
Hi.
Virginia.
Okay, well, we'll start. So I'm Virginia Maksymowicz, which sounds like a mouthful, but the name is not really that hard. And I'm primarily a sculptor, which is why I'm a member of Philadelphia Sculptors, but I also do drawing and printmaking. I've always been a bit mixed media. If you can't tell by my accent, born and raised in Brooklyn, I still sound like Bernie Sanders. I got a BA from Brooklyn College, and I studied for a year at the Brooklyn Museum Art School, which unfortunately went out of business a long, long time ago. I got my M.F.A. in visual arts at UC San Diego, and that was an exciting time because artists such as Alan Capra taught there, Eleanor Anton, the performance artist. It was a real mixture of people. And then after grad school, and I met my husband as an undergrad, so we both wound up going to UC San Diego together. Then we moved back to New York, and for 2 years, we both worked on a CETA-funded Cultural Council Foundation artist project. Now, no one has heard of CETA. It was the Comprehensive Employment Training Act, right? And it ran from 1974 to 1983. Under CETA, 10,000 artists were employed across the United States, the same number as the federal art project of the WPA. And it is driving me out of my mind that as we're facing this inevitable recession and probably a depression, all the articles written, everything on NPR, everything you'll find on the web refers to the WPA, which was a long time ago. See, so I'm putting my plug right away because we are trying to get it more visible because it was bipartisan. Richard Nixon signed it into law, right? So Republicans supported it. And how it worked was block grants were given to states. And the biggest two differences with the WPA is WPA was centralized, artists had to turn in their work. This was block grants to states and municipalities. We got to keep our own work. We worked a lot in community assignments, so it's very diffuse. But I think it's a model going forward. And it's a good time to put in the plug, not just because of what's going on, but CETA proved invaluable to me and my husband. Not only did we have jobs for 2 years where we made $10,000 a year, which if you do the inflation calculation is between $40,000 and $45,000 a year now, with health insurance, vacation, 4 days a week at a community assignment, 1 day a week in our studio, and they sent inspectors around to make sure you were doing your work, which is interesting. But the connections I made through CETA remain. I'm still friends with a lot of those people. I got my first teaching job, which was a 1-year position at Oberlin, right after CETA, because on the interview, they were so impressed with the public artwork I did at the New York Botanical Gardens and other projects that I was involved in. And we actually wound up moving to Philadelphia when my husband got a teaching job at Drexel. He was the founding director of the photo program there. And that, in a way, came through CETA connections. You know, I mean, he applied for the job, but because there were some people there who he had worked with in New York, they knew who he was and he got an interview. So, you know, that kind of experience really formed me as an artist. So yeah, it was my education. And then it was my sort of postgraduate education, I'll call it, those 2 years in New York, working in community assignments with not only visual artists, but poets and writers and dancers. It was fabulous.
Could you tell us a little bit about your typical studio practice and maybe talk about some of the pieces that you submitted with?
Right. Thinking of my studio practice, there's sort of the conceptual part of it, and there's the, I'll call it the form part of it, and then what I'll call the practical part of it. Okay. Because, this definitely comes from my education at UC San Diego, starting with the concept, all right, starting with the form. And I already mentioned that I'm a sculptor, but I am mixed media. So I work in a variety of forms and materials. And a lot of my sculpture, not all of it, falls into what I call a peculiar niche of relief. All right, so you have wall relief. It's sort of in between painting and sculpture. And that it sort of worked hand in hand, my attraction to wall relief and then my current conceptual direction of linking the body to architecture, and especially women's bodies to architecture. And I was thinking back to, I think, the first installation I did, and I can't remember the year off the top of my head. It was in the late 1990s, maybe 98, I don't know, at St. Joe's University, the old gallery they used to have in Boland Hall. There was a room in the upstairs part of the gallery that had this bizarre architectural molding. Instead of a flat wall, it had molding going around, sort of making a square and rectangles in the middle of the wall. And painters hated that room. And in fact, they eventually sheetrocked over it because it was almost impossible to hang a canvas. But I looked at that and I said, it's got potential. And I wound up doing a piece called Garden of Earthly Delights, where I took a cast of what's called a ceiling medallion, those sort of reflections that go around the light, all right? So I had a negative cast of that, and then I was working a lot in cast paper, and I still do a lot in paper pulp. So I did cast paper ceiling medallions, and I had cast papers of my face, and my mouth was open, and jammed into my mouth, each iteration had a different fruit or vegetable where the description was also used to describe women. So kind of luscious strawberry, tender artichoke, ripe fig, all right? So if you can imagine, and if anybody goes to my website that's with the older work, you can see it. There were these rectangles on the wall with the architectural molding of the room, then the medallions, then my face, then these vegetables. And I painted everything the same color. It was kind of a gray wall. And that was a turning point for me, because that linked for me the wall itself and what I was putting on it. Prior to that, it was relief, but I was tacking things up on the wall. Now the wall was part of it. So that really, made me start looking at architecture. Then the first time I started doing caryatids, which sometimes people confuse us. Caryatids are only the female figures that are like this that take the place of columns. The males are not caryatids. They're either telemons or atlantes. And most of the time, they're not in this sort of effortless position, even though occasionally they are. But you're likely to see a telemon or an atlante kind of struggling to hold up. All right. So the first time that I used caryatids, actually Blaise and I collaborated on this. It was a piece for the Philadelphia Fringe Festival. And the headquarters were at the old National Building in Old City, that isn't there anymore. But it had these insets in the architecture in the front. And we made these banners that we painted onto Tyvek, which is, I always describe it as what FedEx envelopes are made out of, that kind of plasticized material. And we had them hanging up. And they were images of caryatids holding up what we called guys on sticks. So thinking of William Penn on top of City Hall, or the Civil War monument in the park where near the police touch Museum with the guys kind of on that, or we even had a picture of Lord Nelson in Trafalgar Square in London. And that sort of got me interested in the idea of caryatids sort of as a metaphor for women holding up parts of society. So that sort of leads me to some of the work I submitted. And even though I can't bring you to my studio right now, I did bring stuff here. So here are just 2 tests, all right? And you can see there's a thin one and a heavier one. And the idea is that you look through the image on the thin silk to the heavier one, and ambient air currents kind of cause it to shift. And what I did was I paired images of women either from folk traditions or maybe statues of folk traditions with classical caryatids. So I have an African woman with baskets on her head. She's actually overlaid not quite with a caryatid, but with stacked acanthus capitals that make a column. What I just showed you is a Russian woman doing this traditional bread and salt welcome, and she is overlapped with a caryatid in Munich. Another piece that refers to caryatids, and this talks a little bit about freestanding and connections to walls, is caryatids in 5 books. And that piece has 5 casts, hydrostone, which is a super heavy plaster. And then I use something called laser tran, which is a way you can transfer images, and you can transfer color images. It's kind of like a decal, it floats off and you can.
Does it work when the material's wet, or do you sort of?
The plaster doesn't have to be wet.
Okay.
Right, but you soak the laser tran and then you slide the decal off. And actually, if you work in ceramic, it will fire.
Whoa, that's cool. That's very cool.
But this one's in hydrostone, so after I put it on, then I just coated it with a shellac, which kind of binds it in. And I compare, on one side of the page, I have images of caryatids from photographs that we took traveling in Italy. My husband and I both, we've been at the American Academy in Rome 3 times, so we got to spend time photographing caryatids at Hadrian's Villa and all to the Vatican Museum.
It's amazing, yeah.
It was great. And then on the other side are verses of a poem by a Romanian poet, Cristina Monica Moldoveanu, who I found on the internet. And I started emailing with her and I asked if I could use her poem, and she said yes, and she was very gracious about it. But that piece is interesting because it talks in a way about fragility. So strength and fragility together. So the freestanding version, each book is on an impossibly skinny, precarious pedestal. And it looks like it'll just fall over. The pedestals have to be bolted into the floor. But I was in a show where the gallery wouldn't allow me to do that because it was a concrete floor.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I have an alternate version where I have a shelf kind of on an angle. And actually there are holes cut out. There's blocks on the back of the book. So the books can kind of float on the shelf and not slide down. And then that goes on the wall, and then I have acanthus molding. And the whole thing with acanthus is that also has its own symbolism having to do with women and life because of the Demeter and Persephone myth. The story about how the design of a Corinthian capital came to be was, according to Vitruvius, was that a basket was put on the grave of a maiden and a stone on top of it to keep it from falling over, and then a canthus grew up around it. And then people have surmised that that's related to Demeter having gone to the underworld and coming back every spring. So acanthus is everywhere. And every time you see acanthus, you should say, "Hi, Demeter. Hi, Persephone." And it shows up, you know, my religious background is Roman Catholic. Going to any Catholic church, you'll see acanthus all over the place. And acanthus is sort of like kudzu, and then it grows like crazy. So it is very fertile. But I wanted to bring that up because, you know, this has to do with the form part of my practice. All right, so I went to concept, went through form, and then the last thing is the practicalities. Because all of us as artists, our day-to-day studio practice isn't what it normally is, all right, because of the pandemic. Right? After I retired from Franklin and Marshall 2 years ago, and a little bit earlier than I wanted to, but I have a bad lower back. So timing was right, and I got out. But of course, that meant I had to vacate my office and studio out in Lancaster and then find a space here. So I did find a good space. I don't know if you two have heard of Green Line Workspace. And it's the Douglas and Dan, who own Green Line Coffee, bought a building further west from me on Lancaster Avenue. It's essentially between 42nd and 43rd, but there are named streets there. And strangely enough, it's on Brooklyn Street. So I moved back to Brooklyn.
Amazing.
And, but it wasn't ready for occupancy until last summer in July. And I have it mostly finished, but there's still stuff to do. Sheetrock still has to go up, and I need ventilation because I have an interior studio. And when I work with the paper pulp, it's not drying properly. I need a little more air movement. But all of that's ground to a halt because of the pandemic. So, you know, I'm sort of in between spaces, right? And I've been going to the studio to retrieve things, but I might be overly cautious. But given that there are other artists in the building, I don't want to spend too much time working there, even though my studio is separate. It might be crazy. But of course, one of the things that has changed in my life is I'm 68, and now I'm considered in that old group, and I'm supposed to stay at home. And it's like, how can this be? So the sort of practical part is staying mostly in my house.
Well, that just led into what I was going to ask you, which is like, because you can't go into your studio, what are you able to do to stay creative? Like, whether it's gardening or like, what form has your creativity taken?
Well, it's taken numerous forms, all right. I mentioned to you that I do like to do drawing. What I've been doing is, in a way, it's hard to call it a mindless type of art, but it is more mindless in the sense that I can sort of go on automatic pilot. And I've been doing a series of drawings based on architectural reliefs of women's faces that Blaise and I saw in Buenos Aires this past summer. We got to go to Argentina for the first time ever. We have friends there. They were after us for years to come. We finally went there. And Buenos Aires is a beautiful city, and the architecture is to die for. And there are caryatids and figures everywhere. So I've been drawing from some of the photographs. So that's one of the ones that I finished. All right. I've got another one.
These are great.
You were beautiful.
Yet. And this one is still in process. So the side on my right is pretty much finished, but I'm still working on this side.
Is
Right?
it my understanding that you were working with these drawings and also a CNC machine
Well,
before?
I'll show you what I did on the CNC. All right.
Awesome.
But I mean, this is this type of stuff links into my normal work. What I did on the CNC was not normal, because what I did was I actually enrolled in Louis Colburn's class at Drexel. For the first time ever in the winter quarter, Louis offered what he called CNC intensive. All right. And as soon as this thing was posted, Blaze told me, and I said, I got to take this course, right? And I literally managed to finish the carving on the CNC machine about 4 days before they locked the school, right?
Wow.
But we had assignments, okay? So I sort of did the assignments, and the final assignment for the, with CNC, we did sort of flatbed carving and assemble pieces. But then Drexel has now what's called a 4-axis router. So if you can imagine something that kind of looks like a lathe, but instead of spinning quickly, it goes very slowly. So you can carve in those dimensions. You don't carve the very top and the very bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So what I did was I did a political piece. Here is Donald Trump. All right. And what I wanted to do, the final assignment was a portrait head. But what I wanted to do was play around with a program called Mesh Mixer, which is free. And you can just, it's safe to download. It's from a company called AutoCAD. It is free. I don't know why it is free, but and it's relatively intuitive to use. It takes a while to get used to it, but it's not complicated. The complicated part was programming the actual carving machine, which took me forever. And I just kept making stupid arithmetic mistakes or putting the decimal point in the wrong place, just stupid stuff, all right? But Mesh Mixer is fun. And there are so many things on the web now. You can go to the British Museum. They have 3D scans of almost everything. They have the Smithsonian, there's 3D scans of almost anything. There are free sites where you can download, but you do have to be careful because you don't want to download something that will infect your computer. But the museums are reliable. So I came across this bizarre sculpture of George Washington by an Italian sculptor contemporaneous with Washington named, I think it was Giovanni or Giuseppe Ceracchi. And it was George Washington as Julius Caesar. All right. And, or Caesar Augustus, I'm sorry, as Caesar Augustus. And I thought, this is really weird. So I actually downloaded that head, but then I made jowls and I put the frown in and I mucked up the hair, all right, all in Mesh Mixer. Mm-hmm. Then I downloaded a column from the British Museum and I chopped the column all digitally and put Donald's head in it, all right. And then I found a laurel wreath that I downloaded and I gave him a corona. I crowned him. And then just in case you didn't know who he was, I learned on Mesh Mixer how to put the words. And so this was actually just carved in foam because there were, the class wasn't that crowded, but I think there were 8 people in the class. And to have 8 people say carve in wood, it would have taken way too long. So this is foam. But what I did when I got home, and I finished this after the class was finished, was I gouged out the bottom. I happened to have a chunk of lead. I put a chunk of lead in, I put hydrostone and put the cork on the bottom so it has some weight. So
do you have that file so you could remake it out of wood with the same file that you made?
Right, and you can change the size.
Mm.
That's the beauty of digital. Once it's done, you can scale it any way you want and, you know, do it in different materials.
The next question we'd like to ask you is, in what ways do you think art and artists are going to be beneficial during this time, especially in this pandemic, during and after?
Yep, yep. Well, I think artists could be the most beneficial by doing what we do the best, which is we're visual artists, give vision to the times. And, you know, there's certainly a lot going on, and certainly on the web, there's a lot going on. There are people doing all sorts of visual memes. In fact, I did one. Did it work?
Oh, yeah, it worked.
It did.
Wow, this is amazing.
So the funny thing is, actually on Art Blog, I was in last week's art meeting. I had done a drawing for the faculty show at Franklin and Marshall last year of Kim Kardashian, a huge drawing. What about maybe 7 feet high, 6 feet, of Kim Kardashian and one of the Bernini columns that goes like this at St. Peter's. And I thought, let me bring back Kim. So I did, and I flattened the curve. I think the online stuff is important. And of course, given that we are supposed to be staying home, I mean, even young people aren't supposed to be out that much. That is the natural way to do it, but not everybody's on the internet. And there's also so much stuff on the internet. It's almost impossible. I mean, it's either too much or you can't find the thing you're looking for.
What is your dream project?
Well,
But what is your dream project outside of like the pandemic?
Or both.
Okay, outside of the pandemic.
Yeah.
I actually have two dream projects. I would like to do a series of life casts of real women as caryatids, all right? So they would be cast in hydrostone, and they'd actually be installed somewhere. So you would have caryatids, and there's another thing with caryatids that, in a way, sometimes they're almost invisible. Now, when you think of something like the Erechtheion in Greece, they're not invisible because they're out on a porch. But many times, if they're inside or they're sort of half caryatids, they blend into the wall and you almost don't see them, all right? So these would be the high relief type caryatids, not freestanding, because I would like them part of the architecture, and it would have to be appropriate architecture, so that people might not see them right away, and then you turn around and you see them, and they'll look like caryatids, but they're not going to look classical. They're going to look like normal women with, you know, pot bellies, or, you know, too much fat on the butt, or, you know. The other project is much more modest, even though it would take a little bit of money. But I haven't been able to get the Sculpture Center in New York to accept me yet. I've tried twice. The Sculpture Center in Queens, the building they're in, the basement is very grotto-like. And I've been doing these pieces called Bones Plus Tools.
We love it.
We were just talking about that piece.
Okay. And, you know, part of the inspiration, yes, it comes from architecture, bones of the building, that type of thing. But also, again, stuff that I've seen in Italy, you have the bone churches, where, like, there's one in Rome, it's right on the Via Veneto, which is what's even weirder. It's the basement of this Capuchin church, and there are 5 chapels decorated with the bones of dead monks. And the thing is, it is not really gory. It just looks like an overly ornate 1950s Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, all of that kind of gaudy stuff. So part of the reason I really love the basement of the Sculpture Center is because there's one sort of alcove in particular that has a curved roof and a wall on the back, and that's what I want. So I'll keep trying, you know, and maybe someday the Sculpture Center will say sure.
Is there an artist or art that is really inspiring you or exciting you right now?
Well, see, I also made notes on that because I start off by saying, there have been so many. All right. But then I do end up with now. All right. So the ones who came to mind right away is that I've always admired. Sandy Scoglin for her installations. All right. Jeannie Jaffe, who used to live in Philly, who's now in Florida, for her use of cast paper. Jeannie's one of the only artists that I can remember where I went in the show and I saw her work and I said, who is this? I must find her, and wrote down her name and looked her up and called her up and introduced myself. There are these two English artists, twins, the Singh twins, whose work is outstanding. Their ethnic background is Indian, and they do, they take sort of the traditional forms of Indian painting and do it in a very modern political style. So I really admire them. Incredible craft, incredible concept. I admire Bill Viola because of the transcendent nature of everything he does. And I like Maurizio Catalan because of his humor. Right? I think we need a sense of humor. But right now I was thinking, who would I pick? And I picked Zoom. Right?
Oh.
And, partially she's sort of a homegirl. She wasn't born in Brooklyn, but she lives in Brooklyn, went to Pratt. But that girl can draw. I mean, her work is incredible. And I think she has good concept, all right? And whether it's street art or she's doing installations in museums, she just knows how to do it. I mean, she's got a really good visual sense, but it's not just visual without content.
Well, okay, so those artists are all amazing.
Yes.
Is there a book that you would recommend to other artists to read right now?
That was easy. The Gift by Lewis Hyde. Have either of you heard of The Gift?
I've heard of this, yes.
Came out in 1983, and a friend from grad school called us up and said, buy this book, and we bought it immediately. And we're lucky we have the older version because the original title was The Gift, and then a subtitle, Imagination and the Erotic Life of Property. But what Hyde does is he compares the gift economy with the market economy. And there are economists who've done this, but Hyde does it in terms of art. And the tension that creates, because art exists in both worlds. But you've got to figure out where you want to be, because move too much into the market and the gift part starts going away. All right. Yeah. He doesn't trash the market. But one of the examples he gives is, well, it wasn't Home Depot back then, but the equivalent of Home Depot. You walk in, you slap down, you pick up a screwdriver, you slap down your money, you walk out. There is no relationship there. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if you give a gift to somebody, and even if it's not somebody you know that well, but you do something kind to somebody, even on the street, that sort of generates a response, and there's some sort of connection there. So either the gift is returned to you at some point, or that person passes another gift on, whatever the gift might be. And that's what he talks about. And he does it through cross-cultural analysis of mythology and storytelling. It is so much fun to read.
So maybe a segue actually to that statement would be, what advice would you give to other artists, or what's the best piece of advice that you've been given?
Well, I always start with this. A friend of mine, I guess I've known her now for 35 years or so in New York, Marilyn Nance, a photographer who goes by Soul Sister. She's got on the opening page of her website, and it's been the same opening page forever, don't give up, don't ever give up, don't give up, don't ever give up. The whole screen is filled with that. And that is the best advice, all right? You've got to be stubborn. you just don't give up. So you try 8 times for Guggenheim. Maybe you lay off applying for a while because you don't want to bother your references, but you don't give up being an artist. You just do it another way. And I think the second thing is have a community.
I think that's solid advice.
Yeah, thank you. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Virginia. This was amazing. You're an excellent speaker, and we're very, very happy that you are a recipient of the grant.
I think this is a part of the pandemic that has been very good for the art world. Because, for example, the Women's Caucus for Art, twice now they've done what they're calling virtual First Fridays. And it's not, they're calling it Facebook Live, but it's not really live. It's sort of a live premiere of a Zoom that they record on the Wednesday. But it's, you know, artists are doing show and tell. They're just talking about all sorts of things, you know, their process and what's going on in their life and whatever. And that hasn't happened in person. So maybe we need this respite where we're talking.
Yeah, it's created a different kind of connection. While we're not physically connected, I still feel emotionally connected and intellectually connected.
Absolutely.
So grateful for this.
Yes. By any means necessary. But again, thank you, and thanks to Philadelphia Sculptors and whoever the anonymous donor was who gave the money to do this. I mean, it's really coming at a good time, and you know, I think it's more the vote of confidence. I mean, I'm happy to have the money, but it's more the vote of confidence, because something artists always deal with is rejection. And you know, I'm old enough that I don't take it personally, you know, but it gets tired, you know, and once in a while when somebody says, we think we're doing something worthwhile, all right, I won't give up. I'll never give up.
Amazing. Thank you.
Great.
Okay, thank you guys.
Yeah.